If you're sitting bored in your cab all day and you need something to get you through your day, check out Sweat and Grime on any of your podcasting platforms. We geared it to be entertaining and focused on the trades. We're not trying to teach you anything. We're not trying to get you to have a phenomenal working business. We just want you to have a good time. So check us out, Sweat and Grime on any of your podcasting platforms. We appreciate it. Now here's your video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today's Down and Dirty. We're going to talk about getting past the squish, how to get better, more accurate grading in a machine. And what do I mean when I talk about getting past the squish? What made me think about this originally was when we go into a pile with a skid steer or a wheel loader, one of the things that you want to do is as soon as you start to feel some weight in the bucket, as most of us who have ran these machines are familiar with, you're going to raise up on your boom arms just a little bit because your tires have some squish to them. And if we load those tires up with enough weight, you eventually squish those tires to where they don't have any more squish to give. And now you're applying full traction into the pile, you're able to get a really good bucket. So that's what I kind of started this video concept with, was just getting past the squish. But the more I thought about it, this concept doesn't just apply to machines with tires. And I want to talk about something when it comes to a concept when we're grading. So here's our die cast model of our little D5, and I'm gonna use my camera. We're gonna get in tight and close here, and we're gonna look that even though this is a die cast, it really does a great job of representing the real life equipment. Because you'll notice it's very subtle, but there is a little bit of movement in the blade of that machine. Now you're gonna notice that the cylinders aren't going in. We're not actually lifting the blade up or putting the blade down. It's just natural squish or movement in all of these joints. Because if you think about it, we have a pin, and then now here we're gonna get a little raunchy with our hand symbols. Calm yourselves down. But you have a bushing or you have a fitting that goes around that pin. And because these things all have to move and manipulate, they're not perfectly tight. And so as a result, we get this squishiness. Now, we can help with this with proper greasing of the machine. And that's what causes a machine to get womped out over time, is dirt gets in there, it works its way into the grease, especially if you're not greasing regularly, and then it starts to wear the metal down in between the pin and the bushings, and that's where you get a lot of movement and a lot of play. Now, why is this important? Why do we even need to worry about this? If you go through any of my videos or anyone's videos that's a really good operator, you're gonna notice that when they first set their blade down, when they're dozing in a straight line, when they first set their bucket down in a loader, anytime they are engaging the implement on the ground, you're gonna notice that there's a little forceful movement of the joystick. There's a big movement, but then as they carry forward with their grade, it's much more subtle and small movements. And what we're doing as operators, and this is something that's gonna take a little bit to get under kind of your feet under you as a new operator, is we're getting past that squish factor. Because if you think about it, if I just set my blade down and I just rest it on the dirt and I start tracking forward, as soon as dirt starts to load up on this blade, you're gonna get that little bit of movement. You're gonna get that squish factor. And so now I'm not putting down a perfectly accurate grade. Instead, it starts out pretty accurate, and then we're gonna get in a dozer, because we're loading this dirt up, you're most likely gonna get down pressure on the blade and you're gonna start to dip just a little bit. And so as operators, we're compensating for this in real time. Where you're really gonna notice it is in a skid steer. So when we back drag in a skid steer, and there's plenty of videos all over my channel or all over YouTube that you can go look. When you start to back drag, you're initially going to start pretty flat, but as soon as you start to build material behind the bucket, because we're back dragging, there's the squish factor comes into play, and your bucket's gonna lift up just a little bit. And again, it's not the hydraulic cylinders that are moving. It's the actual linkage. It's the weight of the bucket no longer sitting on the ground. It's raising up and it's sitting on the material that's now scooting under the bucket. In order to keep an accurate grade, you have to account for this squish factor, and that's why most of the time what we do is we load up our hydraulics with the weight of the machine. We're not gonna prop ourselves off of the ground, but we are gonna make sure that our bucket is down, and most of the time if you watch my videos, I'm gonna roll that bucket forward just a hair. I'm not really putting an angle on the bucket, but what I am doing is I'm loading pressure on my bucket cylinders so that that bucket isn't just laying flat. I'm pushing it down on the ground. And now what happens is I'm gonna get a consistent grade as I back drag. This is one of the reasons you will hardly ever see me use float on any machine for any sort of grading. Because what float does is you're essentially opening a valve so that you've got a ton of squish factor in your machine. It allows the hydraulics to just kind of float along the ground. Well, that's great when you're just trying to take track marks out of a grade that you've already finished graded, or you're trying to back drag your wheel marks out with a loader or a skid steer. Float is a great option for that because we're not trying to keep any sort of consistent grade. We just want to kind of fluff the dirt a little bit. But anytime you're wanting to do a consistent grade, float is a terrible option because you don't have any control of what the actual bucket is doing. You're allowing the bucket to just kind of free float based on whatever dirt is going underneath it. And so you might be coming along, and we'll use the dozer in this example, you might be coming along and everything's great, and then let's say there was a decent clump of dirt right here that you come up against, and as soon as it hits your blade, what do you notice about the angle of that blade? It's pitched forward, right? So your blade is naturally, again, these hydraulics are open, they can float. As soon as it gets to that big dirt clump, this blade is naturally going to want to ride up and over the dirt clump and then fall back down. The blade's not heavy enough. You're not applying pressure to keep it down on the ground. And that's why most rookies, when they get in a machine, they think the secret to grading is to stick the machine in float. They found some super top secret. And then they spend the next 3 days frustrated because they can't get a nice grade. Well, how are all the experts doing it? They talk about using float all the time. This is why. You have to take out the squish factor. You've got to put pressure on everything so that you've got the machine locked in tight to the position you want it to grade in. So I hope that makes sense. This is one of those topics that's a little difficult to kind of talk about here in the studio, but it's also going to be extremely hard to show in the field because first of all, you can't see everything that's happening around the machine. And secondly, it's really hard to get those angles to show that float actually coming into play and the squish factor. So as always, I hope this has been helpful. I hope it gets you guys grading a little more accurately. We'll catch you on the next one.